Well, good day, everybody, and thank you for joining us on what we hope is going to be a really exciting adventure as we're going forward. Uh, for those of you who are not familiar with us, or those of us who are hosting the call, my name is Carl FHIR. I'm the Deputy Director of Global Goods here at Digital Square, and we're really excited to be sharing this opportunity with you all and having our colleagues and teammates online to actually start what we hope is going to be a fantastic series looking at getting more and more to grips with FHIR and what it means for us in the space of digital health and taking things forward. But before I hand over to Jose, and you may have also realized that the lady masquerading as Caitlin Bowman is definitely not Caitlin today. So thank you, Verinda, for bringing this all together. Would you mind just taking a quick minute and introducing yourself before I continue, Verinda?
Yeah, I'm Rinda Rathod. I am a program officer at Digital Square, and I am also the community manager for Global Goods. So hopefully looking forward to getting to know all of you a little bit better this morning.
Thank you. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. Thank you for everybody for joining and coming in. We do ask that you keep yourself muted until invited or there is an opportunity by the presenter to ask questions. We also are grateful that everybody is putting in their names, affiliations, toothbrush colors. It's great to see the diversity and just the global reach that we're having today. Something that does help us in the later stages of the call is if you wouldn't mind renaming your profile to include your name and your organization affiliation. You can either do that by clicking on your tile. If you hover over your tile on the screen, you'll see there's three little dots. If you click on that, you can then rename it either on the main screen or under the participants list. That way we get to know who we're talking to from different organizations. So it's good to have everybody here today. And with that said, if there are questions that come up during the chat, during the call, please do put them in the chat. We will be keeping a monitor on that. And I do know that Jose will be really excited to start answer some of these questions going forward. I'm not going to take the thunder away from Jose and Varunda, who are going to share a little bit towards the end, the next set of the webinars and where the training's going to. But needless to say, this is something that we're excited for you to be putting in your diaries to take forward. And then the final one before I hand over to Jose from our side is it's a quick note that while we're giving training on HL7 FHIR, this is not an HL7 FHIR endorsed training course or strongly affiliated to it. This content will be freely available for yourselves to share. We really are just sharing the experiences we have from our teams and would value your inputs from that space. All right, with that said, Verinda, unless there's anything else from yourself, I'm going to hand over to Jose.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one quick thing. So we've started a Google Doc here that I've just pinged to everyone, where we have essentially some space for communal notes. So anything that you want to add that you want to make sure you remember or you want to highlight for the community. There's a space for comments. So if there's anything you'd like to share, questions, things like that as they come up. And then you'll see a few other things. There is a future webinars idea. As Carl mentioned, we're hoping this is a longer series. And I'll talk a little bit towards the end about the next few coming up. But after the foundational series, we're looking to the community to help us understand what it is you need for us to cover. So throw in a topic, a short description, and add a vote if you think a topic in there is valuable. And with that, I will say, please make sure your mics are muted and questions are in the chat. Thanks, everyone. Jose, you're up.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. So let me share my screen. Let's get started. So thanks, Carl. Thanks, Brenda, for the introductions. We want indeed to guide you through the basics or refreshing the basics about FHIR. As Carl was just saying, this is not a full-fledged course, so we will touch all of the key aspects of FHIR, but not in the depth that we would normally do in a full 3-day course of FHIR, etc. So some remarks from the beginning. So the house rules you know already, so we've gone through that. We will go today through standardization topics. So just some ideas about what standardization is about. and it just because it makes it easier for us to adopt FHIR if we know which part of the standardization process we are talking about. Are we standardizing the information? Are we doing technical standardizations, etc.? Then we will go into the core of this session, which is the FHIR basics. So we'll do a recap and a shallow dive into what is FHIR, why FHIR came up, what are the resource types, what does that mean, and the data types, and what are the exchange methods, terminologies, etc. So we will go through this and we'll close with a few minutes of Q&A. Then we go to the next part, which is starting to be more oriented towards application, which is how do we put that all together? So if FHIR has resources and if it allows search, how do we put all those things and the data types, how do we make that together? So how do we create references between the resources? How do we put everything together in a document? That's how we are going, what we're going to check next. Also a shallow dive. And then how do we put that into the service of our standardization? So this is going to be back the link to the standardization topic. So how do we make and extend FHIR for us, for our purposes? So there's a couple of things that FHIR enables. That's, we are going to go through that. And finally, and that's actually the most important thing, is there the FHIR community. So FHIR is strongly oriented towards its community. So we will also expose some of the tools that allow us to make part of and contribute and get feedback from the FHIR community. We'll also look a bit about documentation as a precursor to the next things that we will be discussing in future sessions. After that, we'll do some Q&A, some open discussion depending on the Google Docs, that the Google document that you have open, and we'll just disclose or discuss some of the upcoming activities related to this as a continuation to this session. So with that, advancing to some remarks and disclaimers. These are the normal trademark things. So we are going to use the FHIR trademark. It's registered by HL7 International. It doesn't mean that HL7 endorses this training or this course as it is. It's not an official training, and all this is a collection of freely available materials, which means that we could use it and we give attribution the same way you can use it as well when we share it, and as long as you give attribution as well. So the goals for today is just to help refresh navigation and discovery skills. This means that we want to have proficiency and instead of depth. We want to have a community that one group of people may be more specialized in internationalization, other people more specialized in terminologies. But as long as every one of us knows how to explore these things, how to discover the parts that are missing, whether by navigating documentation or discovering within the community what is happening and what are the good practices, we don't have to have, or we cannot have, an exhaustive content here, but we are choosing a broad view of FHIR. We have little time, but we will have definitely time for questions, and we will really appreciate your input for the planning of next sessions. Just one personal disclaimer there. When I listen to myself, I realize that I talk too much and too fast. Please let me know, the organizers or the attendees. Please let me know if this is going in a reasonable pace. If you miss something, don't worry. The session is going to be recorded, so you can also listen after the session today. So before we start, and if there is anything that we take out today, is besides the introduction to FHIR, is that there are events that you can participate, and there is a very active community. The things that are really important, and I think the one thing that we should get used to always having available is the chat.phir.org. It's our community chat. It's an open communication channel. There's lots of subgroups, lots of discussion streams. If you don't have, please create one account as soon as you can during the Q&A session today, after the session today, because that's going to be our go-to point. If we miss something, if we don't know something, or if we have a doubt about interpreting the standard or one of its applications, this is the place to go to. Community.phir.org is also a support forum. It's not live, it's more on questions and answers. So we might have a more comprehensive, although slower response there. But if we know, so if we are used to using the FHIR site, which contains most of the information that we need, and the chat. If we take this with us today, then we already know the key places to look. We are going to explore today how to look further in there, but these are the things that we should take out today. One important announcement / reference is the Dev Days. So Dev Days is a very engaging event that happens twice a year. And it's really the place to discuss beginner questions, advanced questions, and ultra advanced questions, like how should we refactor the way that we do specifications, or how do we do this more advanced set of features? Is there any new feature in FHIR that is missing? So those discussions, they tend to happen in the HL7 working groups and in the Dev Days. So the Dev Days is a place for the newbies and the pros and advanced to meet. And there is, thanks to HL7, there is a discounted rate. Sorry, discounted rates for sorry. So for people in lower and middle income countries. If you want to register, I do recommend that you try to attend one of these events, because they are really insightful. There's lots of sessions. If you go to devdays.com, you'll see some previous sessions. You'll see the plan for the upcoming June session, and you'll see the agenda. It's very rich. You can choose your level. You can choose what the topics. It's really something that, as you go into FHIR, it will be very interesting as well. Very, very interesting as well. So let's start with the juicy bits. Motivations for standardization. These are the things that we typically think when we talk about standardization. We want to do standardization because we want to be conformant with standard X. So in this case, FHIR. That's pretty much that's a very common motivation today. We want to be conformant with FHIR. Many times this is not a reason by itself, unless it's a legally required standard, which some standards are legally required. But we also have other motivations, and they are the ones that maybe influence our adoption or not of FHIR. So if you want to support internationalization for our products, whether we want to do something that we don't want to develop everything in-house and we want to be able to import international solutions, or we want to build a solution that we can internationalize, this is one of the motivators. The other thing is that solution Y talks FHIR, so we should talk FHIR as well. In some cases, we just want to standardize the data. So let's look at standards to see how we can make our system in a way that the data will be standardized. For example, if you want to have a COVID dashboard, COVID infection dashboard, and the COVID death rate dashboard, it is kind of important to standardize what is the meaning of deaths by COVID. Is it death while a COVID infection was happening? Is death exclusively attributable to COVID? These are the kind of data standardization challenges that we might use as a motivation. And one that is also interesting, and from my experience is actually for me the most important one, besides the legal one, is reduce complexity while supporting variety. So standards are not there to say you can only do this exactly this workflow. Standards are there to say, since we expect some variation in the use cases, we expect that if you have a patient, sometimes the patient has a gender defined, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the patient has a name, first name as a family name, and then the family name, or sorry, the first name is the given name, and then the family name. In some cultures, is the other way around. So we know, if we know that that variety will happen, how do we do that without redesigning our systems over and over again? That's for me one of the very good motivations to go to a standard, which is, let's see how the standards guys are doing this. Also for us, just to map our activities, where we are in terms of standards. So HL7 started many years ago by looking at the OSI model and saying, well, we have the physical connections. How do we exchange the data? So for those that are older or almost as old as me, we have several layers. So when we build interoperability or communication between systems, at some point we have to define not only how the bits are transmitted, but how they are packaged together, but also how does one application talk to the other. For example, how does a patient registry application talk to a prescribing system? So in that higher level, that's the level 7 of the OSI model, and HL7 is actually HL7 means health level 7 because of the OSI layer, the 7th OSI layer. This was a few years ago. I think at this moment it also makes sense to start to map what we are doing in terms of standardization to more of an enterprise architecture framework. For example, this is just a picture that shows the Zachman framework. And if we have that, if we have the Zachman framework, we are looking at what are we standardizing with FHIR? Well, we are standardizing the data. We are standardizing a bit of the process, how it works. Maybe we standardize a bit of the roles, but this is pretty much the quadrants where we stay. So in FHIR, what we are standardizing is pretty much in this area. That's why it's kind of a heat point. It's there. We standardize the data, a bit of the roles, some of the rules, but this is where we are. One of the goals that we are having in the FHIR community is to see how can this help, or how can the FHIR tooling help us expand to the other areas. For example, if we have to make a list of geographical locations, which is actually important, how do we support that in a standard format? How do we do an organizational role list? This is also important, not only for having that information as a consultation, but because this might determine, for example, access control. If we say only doctors can see this information, then the notion of doctor, the role of doctor has to be standardized. So these are also other parts of FHIR so these are also parts of the standardization that we could address with FHIR. I just wanted to give you this introduction that mostly this is where we are. When we talk about FHIR, we are mostly on standardization data, a bit of the interchange at the lower level between the actors. That's what we are standardizing. Still related to that, just one remark on the information levels. So in FHIR, we are saying how this is implemented. So we say the standard for exchanging a patient name is that patient is an object, so a resource that has an attribute called name, which is repeatable. And the first attribute there is the given name, or sorry, the given name is one of the attributes there. And a patient can have several names, but as long as the given is there, that is, for example, the patient's main given name. This is how we implement it. On top of that, FHIR also allows us to document our data in a more abstract level. Just a remark on this, and this is the reason for this slide, is that sometimes if we are analyzing two systems and how they can connect to each other, if we start from the physical layer, sometimes the physical layer does not map because the logical layer is not intended to map. Sometimes we have family name and sometimes we have first name, and these two, they don't mean the same thing. So sometimes it's important to keep aware that what we are doing is the physical level, and there is also a logical layer around it. If we want to use it, we can also use it. That's part of the future sessions that we have. But we are on the physical layer, and it's not a surprise that sometimes the physical layers do not align because systems are different and data means differently. In that case, we have to figure out solutions like mappings, etc. So what is FHIR? FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It is a technical specification for data exchange, so it is in the data of the physical layer. It is a computable specification. This will be visible throughout the day-to-day and throughout our further developments and tooling and terminologies and all those things that we will address in the future. There is one thing that is very powerful and very meaningful in FHIR, which is it is a computable specification. Most of the things that we do in FHIR, they are not only narrative, they are understandable to a computer. So if we say this element is mandatory, it's not only narrative, it's not only text that's behind it, it's actually something technical that a computer can automatically detect if this is true or not. This allows us to do validation, for example, with schemas and with dedicated tools. We can do lots of the testing, and lots of the hassle of implementing FHIR is really facilitated because FHIR is a computable specification. So don't mind if throughout today we refer to FHIR being a computable specification, because it does allow a couple of goodies. It does rely on industry standards and technologies. So industry standard technologies and formats like JSON, like XML, the RESTful APIs, etc. So it just uses that and applies that to healthcare. It uses other underlying standards. It uses a lot of underlying standards, but FHIR is a specification that does not recreate everything. It just uses the best possible or the most adequate standards for exchanging information in healthcare. It defines, in its core, it defines data objects. So it defines the resources. That's the key part, or the atomic exchange unit of FHIR. These resources can be composed to form any type of communication, from reporting, for example, a blood pressure measurement, to, for example, saying how many vaccines do we have in stock. These are the things that FHIR allows through combinations of the resources. And this goes back to the using FHIR to standardize by enabling the variety. There is an infinite case of use cases, or an infinite set of use cases, but as long as we have the right building blocks, we can pretty much build whatever we want. That's the expectation, and that's the goal. So it addresses also, FHIR addresses also some of the common challenges in standardization. For example, it's a computable language, so no two people or no two systems are expected to have different interpretations of what the standard means. It also allows us to do more automated documentation. We will see that. It also allows us to have a better control over terminologies. It allows us to have better control over testing, because those things are challenges in standardization. Standardization is not just defining the file, it's putting it in place. And those are the things that FHIR also supports. And finally, it's supported by a very large community. So FHIR is pretty much, the success of FHIR is due to its growing community. So the FHIR standard, this is one way of representing what we will be discussing today. In its core, so we have the FHIR information and data model. So we have basically resources that contain elements, and those elements contain data types. We will go through this today. So this is kind of the central part of FHIR. And then we have the terminologies. So there's value sets, code systems. There's other things like naming systems. We have, how do we transmit that? Is this, do we want to support search or not? How do we can do RESTful in a way that we just exchange resources. We can do bulk data. There's a thing called operations. And then there's more of the transport layer, which we can use RESTful APIs. We can use GraphQL. We can use SOAP. We can use documents, messages. We'll go through those, but there are different levels of the specification. And then on the right side is more for the implementation side. So if we have logical models to model our information as it's meant, we have mappings, and then we have the conformance statement. So those computable conformance aspects of FHIR that they can contain the specifications. We can do some validation using FHIR, this within conformance, and we have a lot of reference implementations. So if we are going to do something, most likely someone has already done something in that field. So we also can rely on reference implementations. So this is just one sample representation of what FHIR can do for us. And so let's look at FHIR. The typical two sites that I usually use when I want to see what attributes are there, what do I need to consult, are these two. So hl7.org/FHIR, this is the currently officially released version of FHIR. This is the latest official release. So FHIR will have several releases. There is a release coming soon. There is a release coming next year. But at any time, hl7.org/FHIR, this will point to the latest officially published release. In the meanwhile, we are doing lots of work in improving that release. Sorry, my mouse is sometimes clicking. And if you want to see what is coming in FHIR, what are the new things that are coming in FHIR? For example, today I had a question about one field, and I was wondering, this doesn't make sense. Do I have to create a ticket because I don't agree with the specification or I don't understand it? Do I have to seek clarification on this? And as I was going to do it, I just decided to look at the build.phir.org, and it was no longer there. So someone had already provided that kind of input, and this saves my effort of creating an issue. So those two sites, those are the starting points for everything. We will navigate through them a bit today, but those are the places that we'll go through. Actually, we can go there. We can go there now. So let me bring up the FHIR release. I presume you can still see my browser window. Someone please let me know if not, but I will continue then. Okay, thank you. So FHIR is highly navigable set of information. So when we go to FHIR, we see a landing page that points us to a few resources, but it has a getting started section that we can have well, if we are looking at terminologies, or if we're looking at security and privacy, if we are a general, I don't know, a general professional that doesn't have too strong IT background, or if we are a developer that has a strong IT background, or if we're just a clinician that wants to look at this, or if we are a higher level system architect, there's some overviews that are tailored for people to get into FHIR. So the first thing that I would, if you are new to FHIR, or if your colleagues will be new to FHIR, this is always a good point. Start here, and if you see that some information would be good here, don't hesitate to pass that feedback along. But this describes pretty much what how we start with FHIR, and it points us back. So let me point back to the main page where we have the resources. So we have then some documentation about what what kind of documentation we have in FHIR. So there is lots of things that we can navigate through the resources, but there are some reference pages here. So the life cycle of resources, we'll actually see this in a second. What are the conformance rules, and how do we handle narrative? What are compartments? So these are documents that are within the specification. For example, the security part that I was mentioning before, it's here. There's a couple of sub pages here. The if we have the so adopting and using FHIR, for example, the profiling of FHIR, this is something that is can you still hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Sorry, my Zoom was so if we have this pages here that we can navigate, this already allows us to explore a bit the way that FHIR works. Now let me see if I can just bring it back here. Yep. My Zoom meetings are not working anymore, so I cannot click on the screen. Give me a second. I think I'll have to.
All right, it's looked like, unfortunately, Jose's Zoom has hit a bit of a pause. So while we take a moment, I do want to remind everybody that there is a actual document that we're keeping track of any questions that you have. So as a reminder to that, we're just going to paste this link in the chat. And we do encourage you to please put in some questions, any comments around there. What you will also see for those astute members who are in the document, that there is the listing of the up and coming webinars and the dates of that. And the next one that we're looking at is FHIR and the terminology. And following that will be the FHIR implementation guide and the advanced usage of it. One of the key focuses that we've been looking at and the challenges that we've been trying to address as Digital Square is how do we really rise the tide in the entire ocean for everybody working with FHIR. And we're looking at what are some of the key challenges we've heard through our communities with groups either getting started with FHIR, understanding how to align to it, and also using it correctly and making sure that there's a broad understanding of things that are going on in the space. And this is really one of the key aspects of why we're doing this initial series and seminars going forward. We will look after these to actually do a bit more practical conversations and bring to light FHIR in use. This would be leveraging some of the existing work that we've had the privilege of supporting in the Digital Square space, such as seeing groups utilize the FHIR standard to exchange laboratory results data, or how FHIR is being used at the moment in case reporting, particularly through with COVID. And so there's been quite a lot of exciting investments into FHIR globally and within the Digital Square Global Good space. Many of you on this call, we're excited to have seen how you've adopted the standard into your technologies and your key workspaces moving forward. So I think with that interlude done, Jose, are you back and able to hear us?
I am. Apologize. I don't know what happened. My computer just stopped responding. My Zoom just stopped responding.
All right, so great. Good. Over to you.
Thank you. So I presume you can see my screen again?
Yes, we can.
Yep. So yeah, so as I was saying, and apologies for the interruption, the FHIR specification itself contains most of the documentation that we need to get started. So if you want to get started, this is where you'd go to. Today we'll just go through this. I'm just going to give an overview of some of the key pages in this specification. So this is the current release. If I click on the resources tab on top. Sorry. Okay.
Please make sure to mute yourself.
So if we look at the resources tab, we have several ways of listing the resources. We can have this by categories, by alphabetical order, by layout in a previous version or in a previous -1 version, or by maturity level. I'll get to there. By status, by committee. Those are more internal things. But if we want to look at the resource, for example, let's see the resource patient. So it will be here. If of course, it's also alphabetically listed. When we look at the FHIR resource, all that we need to know about the technical conformance aspects of that resource, it's described in one single page. So let me go back to my slides because I wanted to advance on this. But giving the background, so all the FHIR resources, they are descending on the common set of classes. So apologies or forgive the non-technical guys, but the technical guys know this better than I do. This is just an inheritance diagram. So everything in FHIR is inherited from base. Don't have to worry about this if you're not technical, but it means that we have resources, we have domain resources. So the domain resources are the things like patient, device, medication, etc. Those are domain resources. And what this matters for us is that every domain resource, every one of them has text, which is narrative, has contain resources, we'll see that later, has extensions, and has a thing called modifier extensions. All the resources that we work with, we don't even have to think about this. They can contain resources, they can be extended, and they can contain some narrative. We'll see how that looks like, but this is a given. The same thing as all the elements, so all the individual data elements in a resource, they have a unique ID and they can have extensions. This is extremely important for how we use FHIR. So the understanding that everything is, or most everything can be extended, and all the resources have narrative and have contained resources. These are things that are going to be very important when we start using FHIR and profiling FHIR. There's many data types in FHIR. So all those data types, they are depending on element as per the previous diagram. So here's the data type here. And they just define different data types. So the primitive ones, the normal ones, string, a code is a type of string. We have a number, an integer. We have a URI, which can be a URL or a canonical address or a OID or a UUID. So those are all of type URIs. We have Booleans, we have base 64 binaries. We have a couple of primitive types, and then we combine them like complex types in XML. For example, we combine them into more general purpose data types. So we have a thing called period, and the period is nothing more than a set of two dates, the start date and the end date. That's the period. We have the ratio, which is the numerator and the denominator. We have a couple of interesting cases, the codable concept quantity and simple quantity, that I would like to go through. But those are just instances or collections of the primitive types. So the primitive types, I know you cannot read this, but that's okay. It's just to show that if you go to the data types page in FHIR, so this one that is linked here, if you go here, you'll see that there is Boolean, there is integer, there is string. They are all primitive types. They all have a regular expression here. So that's all computable. If you're a technical guy, you care about this. If you're not a technical guy, you just care that one thing is a Boolean, the other thing is a number, and the other thing is a string, and the other thing is a URL. That's pretty much what you need to retain. But when we have instances, this is how it looks. So if I have, for example, the identifier. So identifier is one of our general purpose data types. So if we have a patient that has an identifier, if I look at the identifier data type, we have, this will be, I think this might be too small to read, but if I can read it out, identifier as a data type is defined of having a use, a type, a system, value, a period, and a signer. So this is the complex, so this is the general purpose data type. It's a complex data type. And this is how it looks in a JSON. So if I have an identifier, I can have a type because it's 0 to 1. So this is how we start reading the specifications. I'm now walking through the reading of specifications. So a type is 0 to 1 of codable concept. Okay, so then I have the type here. 0 to 1, it means that I can leave it out. The same way that I have use is 0 to 1, and I don't even bother with use because it's optional. So I don't have a use here. So identifier goes directly to the type. And then this is a codable concept. Well, but if I click on the codable concept, I would get to this data type definition here, which is the which means it has a coding and a text. And coding is itself a data type. So I can just click on it. This is really how it works. I'm just going to show it. So I'm on the patient. I click on the identifier. So I know I can click here. So if I click here, I will see the detailed definition, what the patient identifier means. But if I click here, I click on the detailed definition of the data type. So let me click here. I click the data type identifier. It will take a while because it has to load them all up in my browser window. And then it will show me the identifier data type. And then in the identifier data type, which is here, I see those things that I just showed the screenshot. So I have, I want to use the type, but what is the type? Let me click on it. It's a codable concept. Okay, so the codable concept has a coding and a text, but coding is a coding element. So it's a coding data type. So then I go to coding data type and see, okay, the coding contains a system, a version, and a code display, and user selected, which is exactly what we have here. System, code, and display, all those following the data types that we have here. So system is a URI, so we expect either an OID or a URL there. The version is a string, and the code is a code, which is a special type of string. So this is what we see here. But the identifier also has the system, which is a URI, there we see it, and the value, the actual value of the identifier, which is a string. This is it. So in fact, this means that the identifier for this patient has the following type, and the type is medical record number. So we are saying the medical record number for this patient. So with this block, we are saying that, and we say it's P00001. But it's according to the system myhospital.org/identifier/patients. It's in that namespace that we are identifying that patient. So this is how the complex data types or these general purpose data types can help us make more detailed specifications of, for example, something as simple as an identifier that we would have many ways of doing this, but now we only have one, which is you can put the type of identifier if you want, it's optional. You can put the system if you want, you can put the value. Putting an identifier without a value, sometimes or most times it doesn't really make sense because it's not really an identifier if it doesn't have a value. But the purpose is that we use this according to the data type. Same thing with the name. So the name, if I go to patient, I will see that this is the name attribute is of type human name, and the human name contains the use, the text, the family name, the given name, the prefix, suffix, and period. So the period where the period here means the period when the name was valid or was in use. So we have John Doe. And this is how we express it. Family name is just one. So there is just 0 to 1. But the given names are many, can be many. So that's why a given name is a different type of JSON. It's a list instead of an object, or instead of a string. So this is how it looks like. And to be able to identify and to read this, we just have to navigate the specification. So again, this is a shallow dive, but this is how we go through these things. No one knows, I don't know if anyone knows all the data types by heart. I would be surprised, but we don't have to. We just go and navigate the specification to see what these things mean. The rest is gender, male, and birth date. So this is how we use the data types in our instances. So the FHIR resource types, that's the list that we saw before. They are defined computably. So behind the scenes, there is lots of things happening that define a resource. We will see that in future sessions, but for now, just consider that there is a schema defined. That's a compilation of other sub-schemas. So all the data types put together, they define a resource. This is really not a good statement, but in the background, there is a computable way to describe a resource. Important things to look at. So if you look at the resource instance, there's a couple of things that we can see. So the capability statement has an N, and the implementation guide resource has a 1. What does this mean? This means that capability statement is N is normative, and the 1 is the maturity level. So these are maturity levels. So FHIR, when we make the FHIR specification, we define different maturity levels. So a new resource that has just been proposed, this will have normally a lower maturity level. For example, there's one there, device use statement, that is just a draft. When we publish this, or catalog entry, for example, actually this one has been deprecated. But these resources, we say this is the maturity level to give the implementers more or less confidence that is this likely to change, yes or no, if you use one of these resources. And if they are normative, you can be sure that it's not really going to be easy, that it changes without, and in a change that will impact you. So if patient is normative, you can rely on the fact that if you implement patient today, this is not going to be it's not going to be changed very rapidly. Or sorry, it's not going to be changed not only very rapidly, but if it changes, it's not going to be something that affects you negatively. So if there's a change, it has to be somehow backward compatible, unless everyone really agrees that those changes, backward changes are not supported. And I'm not even sure if non-backward compatible changes would be supported. So normative means feel free to use it as is. The levels are 0 to 5, and if you have the if you have a lower maturity, there's a bit more risk to use the resource, of course, if you use a more mature resource. That's how FHIR also was able to lift off and say, this is the way that we use something that's absolutely mature and fundamental versus something that is not as mature, but people can still experiment and with this give feedback. So there are a couple of special resources. Many of them are normative because they are very influential for the rest of the specification. For example, the structure definition is actually one FHIR resource that normally we don't use. It's really for the implementers to implement it, for the profilers to use. But this is not something that clinically it's going to change anything. It's just a behind the scenes resource. But it is the way that other FHIR resources are defined. And this is the way that profiles are defined. So it has to be normative. It has to be stable. Otherwise, the whole tooling that relies on it will not be stable. Similar thing with operation definition. Code systems and value sets, they are very important for the whole way of handling terminologies in FHIR, which is very deeply nested in FHIR. So it has to be also, it makes sense that it's normative. Same thing with operation outcome. It's the expected way that the server talks back to you. Binaries and bundles, the same thing. Those are very fundamental in terms of infrastructure. Those are very fundamental resources. So some of them have to be more mature because they have to, so they were pushed further before. And the others are still following the FHIR development process, which is several working groups globally. They continuously analyze the needs and they enhance the resources, or they enhance the narratives, like the text that we've seen before. They add new attributes, they change the value sets, they do all those things continuously. And the standard itself gets refined, gets improved. At the same time, the tooling gets improved. So someone is making a new server today. Tomorrow, someone is going to make a tool that allows us to do translation of FHIR resources in an easier way. In a few months from now, someone might have another great idea to do, I don't know, test data. Someone is going to maybe to do something that allows us to help deploy servers with some constraints. So the FHIR community is not only improving the specification, but the ecosystem around this and supporting the adoption. This is why it's very important to go to chat.phir.org, because all of those things are discussed there. Sometimes we have discussions like, is this resource, do I understand this resource correctly? Is this resource safe to use? Yes or no? That's one type of questions. Or does anyone have any work done in testing? Or does anyone have any work in for example, how do we sell FHIR to a government institution if they are having an existing standard? Those questions, they are both answered in the community. That's the FHIR development process. And just as a remark, international and national working groups can do the same kind of process, not the same process, because that's HL7 process. But if we have OpenHIE, IHE, several, and the national institutions, everyone can do their own flavor of this. If we say we can adopt FHIR But let's not adopt the whole thing at once. Let's just adopt, for example, just the patient and the practitioner, because at least with those we have the basis. Or let's just focus on the medication part, or on the lab results procedure, or let's focus on the master patient or master product index. Those are things that we can do. And it follows the same thing, follow the same process. We start with some scope, some things will go faster than the others, and that's the development process. And in result, this is the maturity levels that we were seeing before. We have FMM 0, so the 0 that you saw on some of resources, this just means it's a published draft. So there was someone having an idea that this would be a good resource to add. If it's maturity level 1, it means that technically it is safe. So there is no fields without description, or there's no values that don't exist. This is technically safe, and the working group has approved to publish the resource. Then the other resources are more and more into the maturity, not only in terms of approval by a couple of working group members, so the working groups, but also that more and more adopters have looked into this. So the next level is tested by 3 independent systems. And if those 3 independent systems have tested the specification, then it can go, only then it can go to the next level of maturity, until we get the level 5, which is 2 formal publications and 5 implementations in more than one country. And that's when the FHIR resource is eligible for maturity level 5 and being normative. This means that implementer feedback is welcome and is part of the process. So if we look at the patient resource, let me just go back to this, and because this is one fundamental bit. So let me see the patient. The patient was here. So if I look at patient, the patient will have, so when we open the patient page, we see a couple of things, and these are common throughout the specification. So just a quick review of how do we navigate this. We have the content definition, so which is always the same thing. So there's a header that says this is the status, this is the group that owns this, maturity level, if it's normative or not, security categories, we'll get there later, the compartments as well, if it is normative, then it gets this line here. A short description of what the resource is about. The scope and usage, this is very important because sometimes I'm not sure if I should use a practitioner or a practitioner role resource. Okay, then I read the scope and usage to see what is the interaction between those, or what's the overlap, if any, between those, or what's the splitting point that I should use one or the other. So first section is most important to see, am I using the right resource? Then it's the resource content. The resource content is like this, with this tree-like view that we see the resource name, and we see here that it's a type of domain resource. And if you remember in one of the previous diagrams, that's when we see that all the resources are of type domain resource, which in type is based on the resource. That's why it gets extended, which means that actually if I see the patient, I don't see the extensions here and contain resources here. But if I click here on the domain resource, I will see some more attributes, which are the contained and extensions. So since this inherits from that one, these attributes are also possible in the patient. We'll see an example soon. Then the navigation is pretty much a navigation of the data objects. We have the patient has identifier 0 to many. So a person can have many identifiers, passport number, medical record number, national number. Those are all identifiers. An active status, Boolean, the name, as we saw, the human name, some contact information, gender, etc. So this is the list of elements. If I hover here, or if I click here, I would go to the detailed descriptions. Let me just open this on a new window. I would go to the detailed description and any requirements and any remarks, for example, or the meaning of what if the active is missing? Well, there is an assumption here. So all of these things are already documented inside the specification. And so that's the description. Then we have some flags, but I will get to there maybe in another session. But what most important is the cardinality. So this is 0 to many, so this is optional and can be several. And the data type is identifier. I don't have to click here because we've just seen it. So and then we explore the whole data types. So this is a tree-like structure because that's how the data structure will be sent over the wire. but it can also be represented in a kind of a UML representation, which is exactly the same thing with the same links and all. So it's exactly the same thing, but if you want to show it to someone, some people do tend to understand this better. Some people understand this better. It's a matter of taste. The rest are just the technical specifications of this. So this is an XML template, a JSON template, and the Turtle template. So those are the three formats that FHIR supports out of the box: XML, JSON, and Turtle. And this is a difference to the previous version, and this is just one page that has everything. So this is how we can read the specification. Next to this, we have the terminology bindings. So this is, in this resource, what values and value sets are we using? For example, the gender has male, female, other, and unknown. This is defined also in another resource. We will see more details on this, but there is a FHIR resource that determines this administrative gender has these 4 values. And the FHIR specification, the FHIR specification does support, so it does explain to you how these show up. So the terminology bindings have the patient has a couple of terminology bindings, and they are described here. The patient gender and patient contact.gender, they are of type administrative gender. We'll get later to what this means, but this means that for now it means that you can only use one of these codes. In this case, it means that you can use other codes, including this one. So it's an exhaustive list of codes versus a non-exhaustive list of codes. But it's very important to, when you look at the resource, these are the terminologies that you have to have in place. So if I look at this and if I want to say marital status, do I want to make marital status for my country? Then if I do, then I might want to say, let's forget the HL7 codes, because we can. Let's just add our national marital status. You cannot do the same thing, for example, for gender, because this is a required binding. We will see a bit more of detail on that, but this is pretty much what it means. It means that on a patient.gender, you cannot have something that you might call gender identity. You cannot have a more flexible thing. For this, you need to use something else, another attribute, not this one, because this is a required binding to a value set. Another thing that's also important that shows on the page is the constraints. The constraints are computable specifications that say this is how the resource is going to be validated. So not only the resource is going to be validated that, for example, if you have a communication, the language is mandatory. So this is explicit there. But there are other rules that might not be expressed as a cardinality, but for example, that there is a rule that says patient.contact shall at least contain the contact details or reference to an organization. This means that the patient contact, it's the contact, right? Yeah, the contact. It either contains the details or contains let me see what it is. Yeah, the name or telecom or address or organization. So basically this means that all of these are optional, but if you want to inform someone about the contact, you have to have either a name or a telecom or an address or an organization. You cannot have contact with just the relationship and the gender and the period. You cannot, because there is an additional rule that says name exists, or if the contact shall at least contain one of these attributes. So and then there's a bit more of narrative that describes some interesting things about the resource. In this case, lots about how do we make so patient gender and sex, what I was describing before, mother and newborn relationships. These are all narrative things, but there is also a very important part at the end. We'll see that later, the search parameters. Every resource can be searched according to some parameters. So in this case, we can do searches like show me all the patients that are active, show me all the patients with this address, show me all the patients that have this birth date. We can do that because these search parameters are listed here. And of course, FHIR is highly computable. This means that search parameters are also expressed in a FHIR language. We'll get there in later sessions. But what matters for us is that when you do a search, you always look at this to see how can I search on the patient address or on the patient birth date or on the deceased patient. Can I search on deceased patients? Can I search on gender? Can I search on family names? The answer to all of this is yes. And how do you do this is explained here. I will walk through very superficially how do you do that, but this is defined here. So when you look at a resource, these are the key things that you have to look at. Now back to the presentation. So I think we've gone through this. So terminology, bindings, and constraints. The search parameters, I wanted to do it a bit more live. Hope you understand. And this is an instance of a patient. So if we express it in XML or JSON, so I chose the JSON because it's more compact for the screen. So this is how it looks like on the wire. So we have a resource. So the main object is a resource type patient. So we can create, of course, one JSON object for many resource types. But the resource, if we talk about patient, this is how it looks like. And then there's an ID. We know that we just seen that there's identifiers, but there's an ID. And this is also related to the thing in the previous slide. Sorry, I have to quickly fly back to this slide. In the slide of the types, everything has a unique ID. That's why we can say that the patient has an ID, although the patient resource itself does not show an ID field or an ID attribute, but the patient is a domain resource and the domain resource is a resource and the resource has an ID. This is why you see sorry, just flying back to this. This is why you see here the ID. This is a unique ID of a resource in a server. Same thing with the meta. We don't have to go through there, but meta is also an attribute of I think it's of the resource. The text we've seen, it's an attribute of the resource as well. And that's just some text. So all the resources can have, and it is recommended to have, that if you transmit this over the wire, just in case the other entity does not support some of these fields or is not able to understand this identifier, you can also include some text format of this, like a text representation of the entire resource or of the things that you consider relevant in the resource. So maybe you don't want to put all this information. But for example, here you see medical record number is P0001. That is actually the only thing that we care about here. That we have the narrative. So the narrative part includes the patient medical record number and gender and the John Doe. So this is just a text representation. Then we have the identifier, as we've seen before, and the name and gender and birth date. So this is how the resource looks like. This is how we build it up. The other things that we started just approaching now is the search. So how do we look at the search for FHIR? So if we have a server that we want to search, for example, show me all the patients in that family, or that live in that house, not family, that live in that household, or show me everyone that has this last name, or everyone that has this date of birth. That's a search. So the FHIR servers can support search using get or post. So I'm going a bit more into the implementation details there. There's a get way and a post way of doing the search. These search possibilities can be configured for individual systems, and they can include additional resources or limited data. Let's look at this. So if we talk about get or post, so this is a search. If you see get the patient, so if you issue a request to the server and say, get me the patient without saying anything else, you get a list of all the patients. If you issue the list, if you issue the request and say, get me all the patients where the ID is this one or another one, you only get that patient with that ID, if it exists. If it doesn't exist, you have an empty response. You can also get patients with a given identifier, and you can only do that because, as we've just seen a few seconds ago, that the identifier is a search parameter for the patient resource. If not, we would not be able to search for this. But the identifier being a search parameter, we can say, get me all the patients that have not this server ID, because I don't really care about what the server gave as an ID for the patient. I care about the unique number that I use. In this case, I just put some identifier here, but I could have my medical record number, or get me the patient where the identifier has, and then I can say the Belgian passport number 11234. So this is because I can search for different identifiers. Even if the patient contains different identifiers, if there's a match to that one, then the server will return this. And we also have the search for the birth date. So search for the birth date. In this case, I can ask, show me the patients that were born after 10th of January of 2010. So this syntax of search, like the underscore here and the LT there, so this is larger than, or sorry, less than, sorry, these are patients older than I don't know how many years old, older than 11 years old. So this syntax here is actually described in the search page. So I'm just going to open it quickly for us to look at this. But in the search page, which is a very important page, the search page contains a long description of all the possibilities of search. So you can search using a GET request or a POST request. You can search resources. You can search related resources. You can do all of those things. That search page, so I'm not going to reproduce all of that here. That search page shows you basically that all the resources you can search, I mean, depending on your server, of course, you can search using GET or using POST. The syntax is defined there. If you search on a resource, you can have all the resources can be searched by the ID with the underscore ID. They can be searched by the last updated date or by the tags or by profile security. So those are things that all the resources support, even if it's not explicitly meant in the search parameters. And in the search parameters, there are additional search parameters. And this is the, so if you want to start playing with search, this is where you'd go. And then you see a couple of examples in that page, in the search page, that show you how to search for this. So if I look at the practitioner resource, there's a couple of search parameters here. These are the things that I can search. So on the practitioner resource, I can search on the active status, on the address, on the city, on the country, and the postal code. And I can search on the ID. And additionally, I can search and I can sort my results by date or by any of the other attributes. So I can search by these parameters and sort, and I can add these things. So I can add parameters like get me only the summaries. So, or only get me the total. So I don't want to know the details. I just want to know how many patients I have. Or more advanced searches like get me only these elements. So don't show me the name of the patients, just show me their IDs, something like this. And you have a couple of includes and rev includes. That's for more advanced searches, for searching things like, and I'm just going to mention this for awareness. You can search all the patients that have an observation of that type. So you can say, I want to search all the patients, including their addresses, or I only want to see the addresses or the postal code of people that have a certain type of infection. Then you don't have to go through all the details, but you can link the patient and the other resources, which in this case would be an observation resource, without doing that manipulation of data yourself. You can leave that to the server to say, show me this and the ones that point to this. Show me the patients that link to a resource of the other type. You don't have to do the first search and then do the filter and then do the second search. So it's all features that are supported for you. So just a quick introduction to terminologies here. So when we talk about FHIR, we talk about a very deeply nested use of terminologies. A very deep use of terminologies. Everything that we do in FHIR is supported by a computable definition. So, for example, when we have a contact, so in a patient we have a contact element, and that element has a relationship. So we can say this person is a patient's cousin, or this person is a patient's mother, or a patient's spouse. We can say this. And some of these elements, they are coded. So whenever we see a code element or a codable concept, so some of those data types, we say these are coded elements. So they are associated with a value set. So when you look at the specification, if you see the data type here, as we've seen before, and you also see when there is a binding, you see also the value set listed here. So in this case, relationship has a definition, so the kind of relationship, and is bound by a value set. In this case, is a patient-contact relationship, which is an extensible binding, or the gender is male, female, other unknown, and required binding. So You cannot have other genders than this one for contacts, because this is a required binding, but this is the value set, and this is another value set. So when we look at FHIR, we not only look at the resources, but also the value sets that are associated with it. And then if I would click on the value set, I would get that screen. Sorry, again, it's small, but it's just for navigation purposes. Everything is clickable. So if you click here, you would get to that page, and that page would say, well, contact relationship, it's a value set. It's a normative value set in FHIR. So because it has this green box over there, and it has some description, and it has the following values. This is a billing contact person, or is a contact person, or is an employer, or is a unknown, or is an agency, or next of kin. These are the types of relationships that we support out of the box normative. So these are not going to change easily, or we can rely that these are not going to change. They might be expanded, but that's not an impactful change for us. So we might want to add more things to the FHIR standard set of relationships. But if you want to put cousin, for example, or if you want to put spouse, or if you want to put guardian, if those are not there, this is an extensible value set. So you can say, in my country, I no longer link this to the patient contact relationship. I link it to the Belgian or to the UK patient contact relationship. I can make my own value sets. So that's the way that we will use FHIR. But for now, just the important thing is that we can navigate. So when we look at this, we navigate and we see, is this extensible? Good. Then we have to see how we can extend that. If this is not extensible, then we don't extend it. We have to find a way out of this. So if you want to put gender identity here, we cannot. We can just use something else. We'll see that later. Just for connecting the dots, it's not only the value sets that we have. A value set is a collection of codes. So all of these are just collections of codes. But the codes are not defined on the value set. The codes are defined on a code systems. And there's code systems like SNOMED-CT, LOINC, lots of codes that we use. And we can define our own codes. So for example, we can define the Spanish marital status, or we have defined in Belgium the marital statuses in Belgium, because there is a law that says these are the legally allowed statuses. So we defined a new code system with more values, and then we use those in value set. So in the resource, we only use the value set, and the value set is just a collection of codes that are in a code system. So we don't define value sets directly. We define value sets out of picking codes that are in a code system. The code system is identified by a naming system. That's a bit more advanced, but basically when you say SNOMED-CT, there has to be a unique way of identifying SNOMED-CT. For example, this is the way to use SNOMED-CT. So whenever I look at the FHIR specification, and if I see this URL, I know that this means SNOMED-CT. If I see some other text that says SNOMED-CT, I'm not sure. The server is not sure. It's not a unique identifier that I can use. So for all, the naming system pretty much comes down to a unique identifier of a code system that is stored somewhere, that is owned by someone else. So all the elements they have value set, and the value sets can be mapped, but that's more advanced use of terminologies. But just be aware that there are mappings. We can say this code in SNOMED corresponds to that code in LOINC, or this code in ICD-10 corresponds to that code in ICD-11. These are mappings between the codes of a value set. So quick time for some questions and for some discussion. Are there any questions open out there? Anyone want to speak up? I see some questions. Okay, so I see some questions in the Google Doc. Besides the one that are documented, does anyone have a question that they want to speak up? Giving space for that, I will look at some of the comments. So to make our tool align with HL7 FHIR, what tangible things are required? Okay. FHIR defines a few things that are mandatory. So for example, if you use a patient, you cannot have your own flavor of patient. You must use this part of patient. If you use FHIR in a RESTful API, then you must use the RESTful API in that way. So maybe just pointing the link there. So all of these things are predefined. So the way that you do searches, you cannot implement in your own server your own way of doing search. You have to abide by those things. If your patient, if in your country you have a patient that is, and it's very common, we need a gender identity, you cannot add an attribute because that's not the way to add attributes in FHIR. So you cannot just go to the patient resource here and add an attribute because that makes it non-FHIR conformant. So there are things, not a lot, I mean, not detailed. So FHIR is not prescriptive on the way that anyone should do healthcare. FHIR is prescriptive in a way that if you use the patient, you shall use it like this. If you use an identifier, this is how an identifier looks like. It doesn't mean that you have to use the passport number or the medical record number, but if you use a passport number, you shall put the value there and the system, or you should put the system there and the value there, and not add custom attributes in a non-supported way. You cannot search by anything that is not in the search parameters, for example. So until now, what I was describing is what can you do. If you see it the other way around, what can we not do? So there's a couple of things that are recommended in FHIR, and those are all the resources. So the resources shall be used like this. If you want to extend them, there's a way to extend them. You don't have to use REST, but if you use REST, this is the way to do it. You don't have to use search, but if you do it, this is the way to do it. In fact, there is, we will do that when we do profiling on FHIR. But what we do, and we'll still take a look at this today, what we do is to take the basic FHIR foundational specification. So we say this is everything, but we don't need to do everything. So when we say we want to be compatible with FHIR, we just pick the parts that we want from FHIR. We want to do maybe only the patient, maybe only with a standard search. And if we implement our systems and our specifications in our jurisdiction, we have to follow those rules. So FHIR is pushing for those rules, so is prescribing some of those rules, like you cannot have a resource called patient cousin. You have to have a related person. If you want to link a patient to a device, you cannot add a device to the patient. You have to have a device resource, and somehow there is another resource in there that links the device to the patient. Those are the things that you can do. And also there's an important thing, because you put the word aligned with HL7 FHIR. It also comes down to the data models that I mentioned. So if you have, for example, taking the gender identity, you cannot put gender identity here in gender. You have to find another attribute. We'll see how it works. It's an extension, it's something simple. But to be aligned with FHIR means that our data model is mapped to a way that is supported in the FHIR format. I hope the question is answered. And Sarah from WHO, if you could please, after your question, if you could say that the question is answered or not. So how widely, while I move to the next question, how widely implemented is FHIR? I think it's pretty much everywhere, or so many big vendors are using FHIR. Most countries are having, or at least that I'm aware of, most countries are pushing their FHIR initiative. Some people have systems in production, some people have this in the roadmap yet. So I think very wide, but since it's a new standard, it's not, we don't have every country having all their systems in production. There's one thing that I did not mention about standardization. It's that it has to answer a purpose. If you have a working standard in your country, it doesn't mean that you have to go to FHIR. Only when you have a good motivation to change the standard, for example, the standard is not sufficient, or you want to support new technologies, etc., you want to support mobile apps, etc., and you need to change, then you start adopting this. And because of this, it's not that people will adopt FHIR because they want to. It's just that maybe a mobile app vendor will support FHIR because they want to, and that brings people at different levels of speed. So we have people, institutions that are pushing for a large wave of FHIR in their countries. We have other people that are just in their own company pushing FHIR as an exchange mechanism. So it's widely implemented with varying degrees of maturity. But for example, for UNICEF, the WHO is doing a lot of stuff on antenatal care, and there's lots of effort done on that. So in terms of regional and national programs, there's a lot of push to use FHIR, because it was one of the first slides. It answers so many of the problems that we typically have. So how can we reuse the data? We want to capture the data in a clinical universe, but in an easy way. We don't want to burden the nurses with capturing all the data, but we still want to do analytics. How do we do that? Well, FHIR is helping some of those challenges. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Is FHIR designed only to represent individual patient case data, or it can be, oh, definitely FHIR can and is used to represent aggregate data sets. So there are other resources, for example, the measure and inventory resources. There are resources that are supposed to represent, for example, how many people do I have here that have the COVID injection, or how many vaccines do I have? This is also supported in FHIR. So it's not only for a clinical patient-centered cases, it's also for the other cases. Supports position in terms of longitude, latitude, and altitude, but I cannot find the geometry points. I don't know who wrote that question of the longitude, but if you want, you can explore, or you can remind me if we have time later today, but there is an extension for that. So yeah, maybe it's important to mention. FHIR includes what we consider the 80%. So what the world community considers, this is the things that 80% of the systems would do and would do this way, that becomes part of the standard. The things that are part of the 20% that will most likely not be universal or are not yet clear, or we don't know, we know that they will be done, but they are not done in one way, so we cannot standardize one way in favor of the others. So those things, they are not standardized, but some of them are halfway. So for some of them, we define what we call standard extensions. Actually, I can just show you one. And I think I can show you even.
Just as you're coming through this now, in light of time, it may be good to move on to the next section. We can fall back to some questions at the end.
Okay. So there's ways to do location, and the location have, I don't know, there's a thing called geolocation that you can use. So there are extensions to that. This just saved me 30 seconds on the future slide, but yeah, let's move on. The JSON schemas, is there an example schema? Can we take that at the end? Because I hope it will become clear when we talk about schemas. Each country can implement FHIR in different mode. Yes. And how do we achieve real interoperability? Yes, that's a challenge, but hopefully it is an addressable challenge. So let's see that in the maybe at the end today, but something that we can address in the profiling sessions. But to make it clear, yes, it is a challenge, but yes, we provide the basis for that challenge to be at least manageable, and that's the key point. If two people have different needs, we cannot make them talk to each other, but if at least they understand on the language that they can bridge that gap, then that solves the problem. So next session, next topic. So putting FHIR together. After we looked at the FHIR resources, and again, just exploring how this navigates, how we navigate through these specifications. One thing that we need is, how do we put all those resources together? So how do we put a patient and a device together? If we want to say this person wears glasses, or this person has a pacemaker, or this person needs to use some prosthetics. Those are different cases of putting FHIR together. So we are now looking at FHIR resources based on the elements, etc. And there's also a bit maybe of logical models to this. It's very simple. One of the data types in FHIR is the use of references. So when we have a resource, for example, I think this will be the some request. So one of the resources, one of the data types we have in the resources is the reference data type. And the reference data type is also a data type, as all the others, and it's described formally here. And it's normative because it is absolutely essential to the way that we use FHIR. So the reference data type contains a reference, which is a string, a type, which is a type of resource. So we can say this is a pointer to whatever URL, that's a reference. And this is of type patient, or this is of type practitioner. So we can because here, for example, if you have the subject of an observation, we have it can be a reference to a patient or a group. Okay, then maybe we have to indicate what type is it if we want. Sometimes the type is implicit on the reference itself, as we'll see next, but the reference supports us to express the type as well. Then there's another way to express identifiers, and bear with me. This is an important thing. I'm just going to expose it, and with practice, this becomes clear. Sometimes I want to refer to this patient on the server. So, and then I just say, this is a subject and the reference is to that patient on this server. So this is how I transmit it. I just put the patient slash and then the unique ID. So the server assigned ID of the patient. That's the way to reference a patient that exists in my space, in my server, for example. If I know that it's not on my server, but I know it's in another repository, I can say that the reference is to a big URL. So it's not patient slash, it's http/server/something/patient/whatever, or in this case, a structure definition. So we can have local references to our own server, or we can have more global references to something that is an absolute reference to something that's outside of my scope. This is something when you reference something for which you know the unique identifier. Now, if in case of patients, for example, you don't know the unique identifier on the server because the server doesn't even tell you that. The only thing you know is the national number of the patient or the passport number of the patient. Suppose that you're looking at a scenario that you want to see the patient, can the patient enter the border because they have been vaccinated? I'm not saying this is exactly how it is supported, but if you want to have such a use case that you want to see a patient, you want to see more information about this patient to see if at least if the patient is existing or not, but you don't have access, and you might even not know where that server resides. So if you're going between France and Belgium, and at the border they say, where is your documents, or where is your vaccination documents, if that would exist, then you don't have access to the French server in the Belgian border, because that's not how it would work unless you're in a hospital and you have an agreement. Sometimes you just want to see that the patient exists, and definitely the French patient identity server does not want to give you their internal IDs of the patients. So there's another way of doing references, which is called logical references, that you can say, I want to refer to a patient, but not by its unique server assigned ID, but by the identifier. So when we have, remember that we had for the patient, we have the ID and the identifier. In this case, in the first case, we can refer to the ID. In another case, so the logical references, we can refer to the identifier. So we can say, show me the patient with the social security number of 0001, and this is how you use it. So in that case, you don't have a reference like this element here, you just have the identifier of that reference. So, and here you put exactly the same thing as you would put when defining the patient. So I want to refer, so I want to say that this observation or this vaccination, the subject of this vaccination is that patient, but I don't have the patient's unique details here, or I'm just going to refer to this as a logical reference by its identifier, because I don't care what the server does with it. It's not I'm just registering vaccines. I'm not registering patients. So I'm just saying patient with the passport number 123 arrived here and he took a vaccine. Done. This is how we could use references. After we do references, we need to put all those resources together. There's one very important resource for this, which is the bundle resource. The bundle resource is used to contain and to group resources. So if you say that I have a patient vaccination, or maybe a simpler case, patient has a pacemaker. Even after I establish the relation between the patient and the pacemaker, if I want to get all this information at once, when I ask the server, please show me this patient, or please get me the patient and the device, or get me the patient and everything. So if I want to get sets of information, FHIR defines a special resource for that, which is a bundle resource, which is used to contain and group resources. So a bundle is it's really a bundling mechanism that groups resources and puts them together. For example, when I say, show me all the patients with that last name, I ask this for the server, and the server says, here's a bundle, and it gives me a bundle. It can be an empty bundle if there's no search results, or it can be a bundle with lots of entries if there are lots of entries there. So the bundle is a grouping and containing mechanism. Just for reference, there are different bundle types. They can be documents, messages, transactions. We will go through this very briefly. Documents is a way of structuring the content in FHIR. Messages is another. Transactions is another. So there's different ways of putting things together. For example, the search set is what I was explaining. When you ask a server, please give me these patients, that match this criteria, the server is not going to give you a document. It's not giving you a message. It's not giving you a transaction. It's just giving you a search set. So it will return one bundle with a search set type and with 0 to many entries. For information, there are other resources that are also used to group resources. You can have a list of resources, you can have a composition of resources, and you can have a group of resources. Group is more indicated, for example, to say, I want to group all the patients with that disease, or I want to group all the patients with those conditions, or I want to include all the devices that meet those characteristics. You can group things by their characteristics or by pointing at them. Those are pointing things, but the only one that can contain an indefinite number of resources is the bundle. So now on to extensions. This is yet another thing that we need to do when we want to put all these things together. Remember the use case that we want to have the gender, sorry, the gender identity. If we have the identity, if we need to get the identity, sorry, if we need to add the identity, the gender identity of a person, that identity is not supported in the gender, so we need to add extensions. In FHIR, there's a standard way to add extensions. As I showed, there's an extensions link over there. You can click on the link and see these are the standard extensions that we support. So now I don't have to go through those or explain where you can find them. But for example, if you want to see how do I do translations, if I have an address that can be expressed in 2 languages, how can I do this? This is not built into the core resource, but you can add this as an extension. So there is already an extension for that. It's called the translation extension, and you can use that. So the adding extensions, because all the resources are extensible, or all the resources and all data types are extensible, you can add extensions pretty much anywhere in FHIR. Extensions are also defined using some FHIR mechanisms, and we provide those standard extensions. So if you want to add content by putting resources together or by adding extensions to existing resources, you can do that. And finally, there's also contain resources. Basically, I can just show you this. So since the resource, so the domain resources can have contained resources. Contained resource is really simple. It's just a way to package one resource inside of another. In this case, I want to have a patient for which I have the medical record number as I had before, but now I want to say, where was this patient born? So I have an extension here. I just use one extension. The extension is simply defined by the URL. This URL uniquely identifies the extension, and then I have the address. That's how you do it. It's really simple as that. If you want to add gender identity, you would do exactly the same thing. And if you want to add contain resources, so in this case, I want to say patient has an identifier and the patient has an organization that manages that patient, we can add a contain resource here. So because the domain resources can have contain resources, then you can add the contain resources there. So it's really simple as containing or putting one JSON file inside of another JSON file or an XML file inside of another file as well. So the extensions and the contain resources and the links between those resources, with those we can combine we can put all those things together. So let me take a break to see if I also take a breath to see if we are good on time and if we have what we need before going to the next thing. And just to have some water, sorry. So how do we exchange data in FHIR? Also, I would ask my colleagues if so I go to the questions in a minute, but if my colleagues, if you can tell me if we are good on time or not. I hope that we're not too much out of track. So looking at how do we do FHIR data exchange. So we've seen the content of FHIR. If we can put these things together, after you can put all the FHIR resources together, one of the decisions that we have to do, and this is normally quite an important decision in the adoption of FHIR, is Do we use documents? Do we use messages? Or do we use REST or services? Services are not very commonly used, to my knowledge. But just to give you a quick introduction, the FHIR supports us to use documents, REST, and messages. REST is the most common approach, is what we've been discussing now. So it's you get and you post, delete resources. This is more of the technical thing, so maybe I skip that one, the details on that one for now. And it looks like this. So when you look at the server, you have the server URL, and then you have the resource, you have the ID of the resource. So you say, if you say, get me all the patients, if you stop here, you get all the patients. But you say, I want to get only this patient, or I want to get only the previous version of this patient, because resources can be updated, or only in a given format. You can do, this is a typical REST transaction. If you want to do documents, this is more of a formal thing. So for example, if you want to exchange a patient summary, that is not something that is just a bunch of resources together. There is an author to that. There is a timestamp to that. So FHIR has a way, and I'll not go into the details. The FHIR has a way to put a bundle with a composition resource and with the other resources there. For example, the patient that has devices and has a list and conditions, those things, you can put all those things together, composing what we call a FHIR document. So there's a specific way to do FHIR documents, because in many places, the data exchange is not done by REST, is done by formal documents that are not changed live. They are changed by one person. For example, a patient summary. It's not because the patient has had one episode in the hospital that the doctor says, I will update the summary. No, there is a clinical value in preserving the integrity of the the order of the information in the summary. The FHIR subscription is something that we can look at later, but it might be relevant to listen to events. So if you want to see, I want to subscribe, it's really like a subscription to a blog or to an RSS feed. Like I want to see whenever some data meets these conditions, I want my server to be notified. You can do that in FHIR as well. So maybe we can skip the rest of the discussion is rather short, and I would like to have a more lively discussion. So maybe we can save the next 5 minutes and move on to the next bits, which is the FHIR implementation. So when we use FHIR in implementation, and this relates to one of the questions, what we have is the FHIR basic specification and extensions. So we have a baseline. So this is what FHIR says. You can do this, you cannot do that. Then on top of that, we can have standard constraints. We can have HL7 guidance on something. We can have IG profiles, OpenHIE guides. We can have standard constraints, and then we can have national guidance on top of those. Each of these, and the project specification on top of all that, each of these, they are further constraining and limiting. So for example, they are adding different value sets. They are adding, making the cardinalities different. The key thing here is that you cannot, if something is mandatory in FHIR, you cannot make it optional. So answering the question of a couple of colleagues, how can we still ensure compatibility if everyone has a different way? Well, if something is mandatory in FHIR, then you cannot make it optional for yourself. It has to be mandatory. What you can do, and this is what the national and standard guidance provides, is that you can define some things that were not mandatory and they become mandatory. For example, a patient passport identifier. You might want to say that a patient passport identifier is always there, or most likely you can say that the national number of a patient is a mandatory element for all the patients. If you want to say that, then you can. Not on the FHIR specification, but on your own national guidance. So this is every layer of FHIR implementation. It provides further constraints and further certainty. So it increases certainty of the expectations on both sides, that allows us to have more ready to use or more plug and play interoperability. So basically every FHIR specifications, the base specifications and all of the other specifications, they add layers to this. So cardinalities can be constrained, vocabulary bindings can be reduced. For example, if something has a non-required binding, and if you want to add the required binding, so if you want to have these relation types, if you want to constrain them, or if you want to have the marital status, you can constrain them, and you can create slices, but slices will be part of the profiling session. And then, so this was a very, very brief introduction to profiling, because there is going to be a dedicated session on profiling of FHIR in the future. One of the things that we do use is FHIR is tools. So besides the FHIR community making the FHIR standard, many people are committed to increase the tool sets, the tool set available. So there's lots of FHIR servers that you can just test now. If you go to test.fhir.org/r4 or to happy.fhir.org, you can see tests. You can play with FHIR now. You can do that now with the latest release of FHIR. You can also deploy your own FHIR server by looking at this Confluence page in HL7, and you see open source implementations. You have a Pascal implementation, you have a Java implementation, you have a .NET implementation, you have lots of implementations of FHIR clients and servers. So there's lots of ways that you can start doing FHIR, whether you want to build your own tools or to use one of the existing tools. So there's lots of commitment from the people to provide more and more of those tools. And this is also an important part. So if you start somewhere, go to the community, ask around, because this is what is really important to retain, is that besides the navigation on FHIR, which can be very complicated and we don't have to know by heart, if we know by heart that we can get a server available, we can deploy our own server. We just have to know whom to ask, and we have to choose our technology stack. If we do those things, and if we know how to ask this around in the chat.fhir.org, then we can save ourselves some time. Actually, and then I think we are getting to the end in terms of the community effort. Please get in touch. Please be active on the community. So the best way to say, am I doing the right thing on FHIR? Am I using FHIR the right way? Or should I even be using FHIR? The best way is just to check with others. Most people have gone through some of the challenge that you have, and very likely you will have challenges that no one has ever thought of, and they'll say, that's interesting, I also have the same need. So chat.fhir.org, community.fhir.org. If you see something that is not correct or not understandable, or that you doubt in FHIR, please ask someone to create a change request, whether to the FHIR specification or to some of those derivatives in the upper layers of the specification. Try to engage in that if you feel the need. So don't hesitate at all about saying, I don't understand this specification. Can this be made more clear, or why is this not clear? For example, why don't we have a national patient number or national identification number? Someone will answer that question. I don't say that this is a valid change, but someone will answer why this is not the case. And also please join events. If you have the possibility, well, now it's difficult because traveling is not really easy, but those events they are all remote. Please join those events if you can. devdays.com is a very important event. There's all sorts of tutorials for beginners. I think we are going to give a tutorial, for example, on how to set up your own implementation guide very quickly using the best possible tools, but that's kind of the content that you can only have in such an event, or a dedicated training like we'll have, which is going to be pretty much matching. But you can also have advanced usages, or you can have the basic tutorials. You can have all these events and this exchange of expertise. And very important in the FHIR connectathon. So in the FHIR maturity process, we've seen those steps, and some of the steps are like the resource, in order to be more mature, has to have gone through a couple of connectathons. I think one connectathon for one level and 3 connectathons for the other levels. And this is because the FHIR connectathons, sorry, I did not mention this before, FHIR connectathons are also events. They are HL7 organized events where people are invited to say, oh, I want to test something about devices. Is there anyone testing devices? Good. I want to test something about privacy and access control. Let's see if someone is testing this. So the groups, they organize some connectathon tracks. And if you want to test, for example, the inventory part, well, at this moment, there is no inventory track, but if in the future connectathon, if you have the inventory or product catalog tracks, if we set up a connectathon, we join, and it's good for people that are going to test their systems because they can be more sure that their system works, but it's very important also for the FHIR community because they say, oh, yeah, these implementers, they have a specific need that we did not consider, and they have different levels of traceability that they need, or they need to track the temperature of the vaccines that we are not carrying until now. Maybe we need to make some changes after some connectathons. So these points, they are not only points of discussions, but they're actually points of work, and they are built into the process. So if you want to contribute, these are the points to contribute. I think we can go now to the overall discussions. Let me just get some water. So
yes, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to ask some questions that are in the Google Doc. So the first, are there any materials, resources for sharing success stories of implementing FHIR that you can share? Theoretically, it's promising, but I can't grasp how to implement it.
I will have to ask around. I haven't seen any. In fact, I was looking myself at I mean, there's a couple of presentations, but the presentations, they tend to be overly positive, you know, that we've done this and we are doing this and this is going to revolutionize the world. I'm a bit more skeptical about technologies until they really work and they really help who needs to be helped, which is the person lying in the bed in the hospital. Until that point, I would like to, I want to, I also actually, so what I'm saying is that there are success stories of acceptance and promotion of FHIR and usage in practice. I would like to have more of those discussions. So I will look around to see if we have those, if we can provide some pointers, especially the ones that impact clinical value. So I think there are some success stories of how exchanging better data leads to clinical success. Yep.
All right, next one up. If a particular system is FHIR compliant, would there be a need for adopting other HL7 standards, such as ER, EHR? No, okay.
Only
Are there
if
any other standards?
Only if that system says that to be compatible with this, you also have to be compatible with that. For example, we can say that to be compatible with FHIR in this country, you have to use SNOMED in that element. If the specification says that, then you have to do it. It's part of the layer that I was showing before.
Perfect. Is there any logical physical architecture for a real FHIR implementation?
I don't understand that question.
Okay. Whoever typed that out.
So, but there are some presentations about the architecture of FHIR systems where you have the server and some layers inside the server. There are some things. I will put out some link to some presentations that are also public from HL7. We will put those out as part of our documentation. But that's a good point. We can put there. And if that doesn't help, you know what to do. Chat.phir.org and ask around.
Perfect. Does an IDE exist to help developers or technologists who want to write or code a data set in FHIR?
There's a couple of tools. If you want to write or code a data set in FHIR, if I presume that you mean that you want to edit your own resources, the normal IDE stuff, so the normal Visual Studios, there is a tool which is growing, has growing acceptance, which is called, so there's a part of the FHIR specification is the shorthand language. So there's a shorthand that you don't have to type all the JSONs and make mistakes with the commas and forget the closing tags in XML. So there is a shorthand way to write FHIR content. And that works well in IDEs. There's a couple of initiatives for FHIR clients, but again, we can also put that out. There's another FHIR Confluence page that says these are the reference implementations, not the servers, but the clients. There's a couple of tools that should assist you with that. There's the FHIR Toolkit that helps you with specific resources, not all of them. To my knowledge, there is no general user-friendly editor for FHIR content. But there's a shorthand language, and at least for me, that solves the problem. I was looking for such an editor, but I think with the shorthand language, that problem, for me at least, it's solved because it becomes easier and it's actually faster than doing this. For profilers, and we'll see that later, there are tools that are visual tools for editing profiles. So not for editing FHIR, like patients, etc. We can do that. But for editing conformance statements and logical models, etc., there are tools for that. We can see that in the profiling session.
Perfect. Where do I find a list of those tools and servers? And did HL7 do an assessment of their usability and benefits in which context?
These are all community contributed tools. So the assessment of the tools are not part of the specification. So they don't go through the formal process of acceptance and maturity process of HL7. So they are all contributed tools. They are open source materials and open source tooling. I think the link that we have in the presentation will get you a list of those tools and servers. The usability and benefits, in which context, that is something that is not part of the formal specification of HL7. Therefore, it's left out to the implementers to validate or not. So no, HL7 did not do a formal assessment of that, because that's the implementer's role to take that up.
Perfect. Should you reference the contained resource in the actual resource?
I forgot to include that. Good point. If you include a contained resource inside another resource, you have to link from one to the other. You have to have a reference from one to the other. Yes, you do. And I forgot that. My apologies. Maybe you can review the presentation before we send it out. But yes, correct. We have to refer either the contained to the container to the contained, or vice versa. We have to link one to the other. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. We don't know in which context the contained resource is used.
Okay, I think I got a request to ask the question about the JSON schema. So I see that there's a JSON schema, but is there an example schema that we could compare and understand before we implement?
So there are JSON schemas throughout the specification. But since I'm not understanding what you want to do with the JSON schema, maybe it's just using it as part of the tools. Can I please challenge the author of the question to reach out on chat.fhir.org, and then we can have a more elaborate, so actually, if you can reach out during the, so after the session in the chat.fhir.org, I would be happy to explore a bit of that. There's more to it than JSON schemas. There's open API schemas. There's a lot of things that we can use. They're all there. So I cannot have a short answer, even when I do understand the question. If that's okay with you, we can explore that further in the.
Sure. We'll definitely add that post in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions I haven't covered. So if there are more questions in the chat, please. Or
anything that was not covered? Does anyone have anything that they don't feel satisfied because this thing should? So this is not an in-depth course. This is just an introduction to how to navigate these things. For me, honestly, if we have the navigation between the resources and the narrative and the data types and the value sets, if we have that, that's actually how we all start. That's the best way to start. If next to that we have the chat.fhir.org to help us when we are developing knowledge, that's good. If we don't leave this session knowing exactly how would we promote this to a governmental agency, that's not the expectation of this. If we don't know how to redeploy our own server, that's definitely not the scope of this session. This was just an introduction to set the baseline for the future discussions. With that in mind, is there any expectation that was not met in this discussion? I would like to hear. Also to help improve the materials in the future.
If you're not comfortable saying it out loud, please feel free to leave comments in the chat. Reach out to us afterwards.
I would have a question, maybe. You are mentioning about different server types, REST API and GraphQL, but could we create other server types, taking, for example, WebSocket as a type of server?
Yeah. When you say a type of server, I'm not so sure, but you can use, you don't have to use REST. You don't have to use GraphQL. As long as, so you don't have to use any of those transport layers to be compatible with FHIR. If you use REST, you have to use it like this. If out of FHIR, if you just want to use the structure of the data and use any other way to do it, for example, by copying a file from one place to the other by hand, I would say that this is also FHIR compatible in that part. In fact, the only thing that, and you don't have to use most parts of FHIR. For a server, for example, for a server to be FHIR compatible or FHIR compliant, it doesn't have to support any of the resources except one. There's just one server so the only thing that the server has to do to be FHIR compliant is to say, I'm FHIR compliant. It's really as ridiculous as it sounds. That's the only conformance strict requirement from a server is that the server says, I'm FHIR compliant and I don't do anything else. So a server can be FHIR compliant if it doesn't do anything about FHIR, just says that it's FHIR compliant. But if it says it in a FHIR way, then it's supporting at least the, one REST endpoint and one FHIR resource, which is the capability statement. And if a server does that, it's FHIR. So the reason I mentioned this is that the answer to that question is, of all those parts that FHIR has, you don't have to use them all. You don't have to use any of them except in certain conditions. So you don't have to use SOAP, you don't have to use GraphQL, you don't have to use REST. You can choose other ways of exchanging information if that is what you need for your purpose. You are encouraged to stick to the standard, communication mechanisms, just because if you don't do it, then your pain is going to be bigger when you want to interact with applications that they say they are REST FHIR compliant. That's the only consequence to this.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions? Any other things that you feel that we should develop further in the future? Okay, if not, then I think, so it's 5 minutes to go. From my side, I think we are good. I would leave to my colleagues if anyone wants to bring up any additional remarks, any highlights or any other things. But I think we should be good to start wrapping up, maybe by introducing the program for the next topics, or some ideas for next topics.
Yeah, let me just jump in before we start getting people jumping off. I think in case you didn't catch it in the email, we are accompanying these FHIR sessions with what we're calling fireside chats. So Jose will have an hour once a month where it's just open. You can join, ask questions, get feedback from him. The registration for those chats is in the Google Doc. So go ahead and they'll be every month when there's a FHIR session. And then starting, I think, as we mentioned, this is the first of a series in FHIR. So we'll have monthly sessions. The May session will be around profiling and documentation, specifically for creating and documenting FHIR for a specific project or a country. In June, we'll talk about terminology. And then in July, we will be talking about developing your own implementation guide. So go ahead and register. I know there's been a few questions in chat. We are recording this session. We will share and post this recording on our wiki, along with the slides and anything that we've captured in the Google Doc. If you have ideas for sessions, please feel free to reach out to me or Jose. We'd be more than happy to take those ideas as we start planning sessions after these first 4. And I think with that, I'm just going to say thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon or hear you soon.
Y'all soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.